happen if you ate nothing but sardines for 21 days? Just sardines. That's exactly what I did. And in this video, I'm going to break down why sardines are suddenly everywhere, why people are using them for fat loss, ketosis, and metabolic health, what makes them such a powerful little food, and then I'm going to walk you through my full 21-day sardine fast results, including weight loss, glucose, ketones, blood work, an OmegaCheck, and a DEXA scan. Because yes, I tracked basically everything. And I'll tell you right now, some of the results were exactly what I expected, and some of them were genuinely surprising. So let's start with the obvious question. Why are sardines having such a moment right now? It feels like everybody is talking about them. Dr. Boz was on Diary of a CEO talking about sardines. Dr. Nick Norwitz ate 1,000 sardines and saw some wild results, including improved cold tolerance. People are doing sardine fasts, posting sardine recipes, comparing brands, talking about ketones, fat loss, and insulin sensitivity. Sardines are everywhere. And I think that's happening because several big ideas are coming together at the same time. People are realizing that metabolic health matters more than just calorie math. They're realizing that ketones can be an incredibly powerful tool. They're also realizing that nutrient density matters more than sheer food volume. And they're looking for foods that are simple, affordable, portable, and effective. And sardines check every single one of those boxes. They're cheap, they're shelf stable, they're easy to travel with, they require no cooking, they're nutrient dense, they're rich in protein and omega-3s, and for a lot of people, they work fast. In a world full of expensive superfoods, elaborate protocols, and increasingly complicated diet advice, sardines are kind of the opposite of all that. They're simple and they're effective. So now let's talk about what sardines actually are and why they're so powerful. Sardines are small, oily fish that sit very low on the food chain. And that's important because the lower on the food chain a fish is, the less opportunity there is for bioaccumulation of toxins compared to larger, longer-lived fish. They're also typically wild-caught, which is another reason people like them. And nutritionally, sardines are kind of insane. They're rich in complete protein. They have omega-3 fats, especially EPA and DHA. They contain vitamin B12, selenium, calcium if you eat the bones, iron, choline, and a bunch of other trace nutrients. From a carnivore or ketogenic standpoint, they are pretty much close to a perfect food. High protein, moderate fat, no carbs. Extremely satiating, highly bioavailable, and very hard to overeat for most people. And one of the other big concerns people typically have with seafood is heavy metals. People hear eat more fish and immediately think, okay, but what about mercury and arsenic and contaminants? And that's a valid concern. But sardines are one of the safest seafood choices out there because they're small, they're short-lived, they generally do not bioaccumulate toxins the way that the larger predatory fish do. And I didn't just assume that, I actually tested it. In previous sardine experiments, I checked both mercury and arsenic after periods of high sardine intake, and my levels did not rise. I did 100 cans of sardines in 1 month, and then I checked my mercury using a blood test. No change. Then I did 30 cans of sardines in 30 days and checked my mercury in a 24-hour urine collection test that's kind of a gold standard for mercury testing. And again, Nothing happened. Finally, I did a 14-day sardine fast. I probably ate 40 to 50 cans of sardines, and I checked my arsenic with another 24-hour urine collection test. Nothing happened. No measurable differences at all. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every product is identical, and it doesn't mean we should never think critically about sourcing. But it does reinforce why sardines are considered one of the safest seafood options if you want to eat fish frequently. Now, if you've never bought sardines before, let me give you a few quick tips. First, keep the ingredients simple. Ideally, you want sardines, water, olive oil, and salt. Second, know that not all sardines taste the same. The brand matters a lot. Texture and oil quality also matter a lot. Now, if your first sardine experience is a mushy, low-quality can, you might think you hate sardines, when really you just had bad sardines. Third, bone in and skin on are usually the most nutrient-dense options, but if you're intimidated, boneless, skinless can be a much easier place to start. Here are some of my favorites. I love the Nuri spiced sardines along with the Matisse lemon sardines. There's a ton of really amazing brands out there. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my sardine taste testing series that's coming up on my channel here in a few weeks. I also really love the Chosen brand for my more moderate price. I can get 6 cans of those for $12 at Costco. Those are boneless, skinless, and I also love the Wild Planet bone-in skin-on. I can get those for $10 for 6 at Costco. Now, fourth, if your goal is just better nutrition, you do not need need to do some extreme sardine-only experiment. You can simply add a few cans per week into your current routine, and you'll get a lot of benefit from that alone. But if the goal is specifically ketones, fat loss, insulin sensitivity, appetite control, or breaking a plateau, that's where sardine fasting gets really interesting. Because sardine fasting is essentially a very simple protein-sparing modified fast. You're getting enough protein to help preserve your lean mass, you're eating very little carbohydrate, and because sardines are so nutrient-dense and satiating, your total food intake often drops naturally without that feeling of white-knuckling hunger. So that's why people use sardine fasts to break stalls, raise ketones quickly, simplify eating, and to kickstart fat loss. And for most people, I just say start small. 1 day, maybe 3 days. That's enough to learn a lot. And if you're brand new and nervous, just try 1 day. You're going to eat 1 to 2 cans whenever you feel hungry, and then stop when you're full. Keep it really simple. Most people naturally end up somewhere around 3 to 6 cans per day, though some are lower and some are higher. One of the most striking things about sardines is how self-limiting they are. Unless you absolutely love sardines, you generally do not want to keep eating can after can after can. That built-in satiety is one of the reasons they work so well. Personally, I've done 3, 5, 7, 10, 14, and now 21-day sardine fasts. And this time, I wanted to know what would happen if I had pushed it all the way to the 21 days. Would my fat loss continue? Would my glucose continue dropping? How about ketones? Would they keep climbing? Would I hit a point of diminishing returns? Would my blood work do anything surprising? Would my DEXA show what I thought it would show? So I turned it into a full N of 1 experiment. I did baseline blood work. I used a DEXA from December as my body composition baseline. I tracked my glucose and ketones with Keto-Mojo. I also wore a continuous glucose monitor. And for the second half of the experiment, I wore a SiBio continuous ketone monitor so I could see what was happening more continuously instead of just relying on spot checks. And that part was incredibly interesting. For the full 21 days, all I ate was sardines. At the beginning, I was eating around 2 to 5 cans per day, but by the end, that had dropped down to 1 to 2 cans per day. Now that alone should tell you something. My appetite came down hard, and that's one of the things people underestimate with sardines. They are extremely satiating. So now let's start with the simplest result, weight loss. I started this experiment at 152.6 pounds, and on day 21, I was 140.4. It's a total weight loss of 12.2 pounds in 21 days. And what makes that more interesting is that after the experiment ended and I returned to my normal carnivore lifestyle, I've maintained about 10 pounds of that weight loss. So yeah, some of the initial drop was probably just water and glycogen related. That's normal, but clearly not all of it was. Now, the weight loss was not perfectly linear every single day. There were days when I went up a little bit, and that happened especially if I had strength trained or if I'd worked out the day before. So that's totally normal. That's likely water retention and a bit of inflammation. That's one of the reasons I always tell people not to obsess over single weigh-ins. The trend matters more than the blips, and the overall trend here was very, very clear. Now let's talk about glucose. Now, my glucose is already generally pretty good, but one thing I know about myself is that when my husband and I eat dinner too late, it affects my glucose more than I would like. I started day 1 with an average glucose around 95. By day 3, I was already in the 70s. I think my average was 74.1 for the 21-day period. Now that's a pretty dramatic shift, and importantly, I did not feel hypoglycemic. I had no shakiness, panic, weakness, no, oh my gosh, my blood sugar is low and I'm crashing. I didn't have any of that. I felt really good, and I think that context matters because a number by itself does not tell the whole story. So now let's talk about ketones, because this is where things got wild. My ketones were elevated obviously the whole time. There were multiple points where I went above 8. I had Keto-Mojo readings that literally just said high, and I had continuous ketone monitor readings that were also above 8 and read as high. Now that usually happened overnight, and this is where I want to clarify something, because people will hear ketones above 8 and immediately think ketoacidosis. But ketoacidosis was not a concern here just because my ketones were high. Again, context matters. Diabetic ketoacidosis is usually driven by severe insulin deficiency, and it typically comes with very high blood glucose, dehydration, acidosis, vomiting, and someone looking and feeling very unwell. And that is completely different from nutritional ketosis in a person with normal or low normal glucose who is otherwise stable and functioning fine. In In my case, I had very high ketones, low to normal glucose, no low blood sugar symptoms, and I felt mentally excellent for most of the experiment. That is a very different physiological picture. Let's take a quick pause here because one of the coolest parts of this entire experiment was being able to see my ketones continuously instead of just based on a couple of finger sticks a day. Going into this 21-day sardine experiment, I expected my ketones to go up. What I did not expect was how much they would move. I used to check once in the morning and assume, okay, that is basically my level for the day. But on sardines, that's completely misleading because I could go from something like 1.5 to 4 to 8+ in the same day. And some of the biggest spikes happened overnight. Now, if I'd only tested in the morning, I would have missed almost all of that. I also noticed a really clear pattern. I would eat sardines, ketones would dip a bit, then they would slowly climb for hours and often peak while I was sleeping. At one point, there were hundreds of high readings just in the second half of the experiment. I think I clocked 275 high readings while I was wearing the continuous ketone monitor. And that actually matters because there were moments where I felt a little off. Not bad, not dangerous, just too deep into ketosis. And without seeing that in real time, I would not have known why I felt that way. That's where the SiBio continuous ketone monitor made a huge difference. It showed me not just one number, but the full curve of what was actually happening metabolically. So if you're serious about ketosis, metabolic health, or self-experimentation, this is an incredibly valuable tool. I'll put the SiBio information below so you can check them out. Now, like I said, there were 1 or 2 times when my ketones got really high. I did feel a little bit blah. It wasn't dangerous. I just felt too deep into ketosis. So whenever that would happen, I would just eat a can of sardines, get a little bit of food in, and then the ketones would usually come back down into a range that felt better, like 6 to 7.5. So that was really interesting to watch in real time. Now, mentally, for most of the experiment, I felt fantastic. Very clear, very focused, very steady. That's something I consistently notice in myself whenever my ketones are elevated into that stronger range. Now, let's get into blood work because this part was also interesting. Broadly speaking, the blood work was not shocking, which honestly in itself is pretty interesting. My HDL and triglycerides shifted a bit, but not outside the kind of ranges that I tend to see for myself in general. Now, one result that really surprised me was my LDL. I used to exhibit a lean mass hyperresponder phenotype, which just meant that I had high LDL, high HDL, and low triglycerides. In the past, my LDL cholesterol has been as high as 263 when I'm doing a carnivore diet. So going into this experiment, I actually expected that since I would be mobilizing body fat, that I might see my LDL cholesterol rise again. But that didn't happen. My LDL stayed under 100 both times, and actually the 21-day result, that's the lowest LDL cholesterol I have ever seen. And that is really interesting to me because for a while now, my LDL, it's been settling much lower than it used to, despite different nutritional states and body composition changes. So that's something I'm still thinking about. I do think it could be related to some microbial immune stuff that I have going on that I think is a root cause issue of my Hashimoto's. I also, in talking to Dave Feldman, he mentioned that thyroid medication could also tank your LDL cholesterol. So I'm wondering, once I titrate off of my thyroid meds, once I put this Hashimoto's into remission, if my LDL cholesterol will go back to the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype, which is high. It'll be interesting to see, but again, something I'm still thinking through. Now let's talk about the OmegaCheck, because with the amount of sardines I was eating, I really wanted to know what was happening there. And this was one of the coolest parts of the blood work. My EPA, DHA, and total omega-3 markers improved, and my omega-6 to omega-3 ratio improved significantly. And that's like exactly the shift you would hope to see if somebody is eating sardines day after day after day. And it gives us a nice objective marker showing that yes, the fatty acid profile really was changing. And I think that huge drop in omega-6s, I'm typically eating conventionally raised meat. I don't do a ton of grass-fed, grass-finished, or organic meats. I do not consume any vegetable seed oils. So that's not why those levels are the way they are. But you can see that just eating sardines for 21 days, a significant drop in my omega-6s. Now, omega-6 is an essential nutrient, but it's the balance between omega-6 and omega-3 that's really important. And you just want to make sure that that's looking good. And after 21 days of sardines, wow, it's looking good. Now let's talk about the DEXA, because this is the part where my study study design got a little messy, and I think that's important to share because real world N of 1 experiments, they're never perfect. My baseline DEXA was from December, and that unfortunately was the best baseline I had. Not ideal though. At the time, I had been megadosing creatine as part of another experiment. I was looking at the cognitive benefits of it. So by the time I did my post-sardine fast DEXA in March, I'd already stopped doing the creatine experiment. So now we're comparing a December scan that may have had more intracellular water and a March scan where that variable had changed. And that makes lean mass interpretation a lot messier. So let's look at the numbers. My fat mass was down 2.2 pounds. My lean mass was down 4.2 pounds. And my visceral fat was 0.87. It basically didn't change. Now on paper, it looks like I lost 4 pounds of lean mass. Now, lean mass reading on a DEXA, that is not just muscle. That is organs, the contents of your stomach, blood, vascularity, and muscle. But I don't think this 4.2 pounds of loss, I don't think it tells the whole story. I suspect that some of that apparent lean mass loss is related to the creatine issue and hydration differences. And I also don't think I got to see my true fat loss perfectly because I had gained some fat between that December DEXA and the actual start of this experiment. And unfortunately, we were in Florida. There was not a nearby DEXA at the exact right time, so I just had to work with that baseline. That's just the reality sometimes. I also tend to have really low visceral fat, so I was a little surprised not to see more movement there, but not completely shocked. It's all within range of what I normally am. I think this is just a good lesson. I need to make sure that I'm getting my baseline DEXAs right before I start my experiment, whatever it's going to be in the future, so that I can get accurate measurements there. So what do I make of all of this data from the 21-day sardine fast experiment? Well, first off, this experiment, it absolutely worked in the sense that it raised my ketones dramatically, it lowered glucose, it simplified appetite, and it caused significant weight loss. Now that part is totally clear. But second, I do think there's a point of diminishing returns. Now before doing this, I had thought about maybe doing like a full month of only sardines. But after doing it for 21 days, I don't think I'm gonna do that. It's not because it didn't work, it definitely did. But it's really hard to fit this into normal life. We travel a lot. It can be socially awkward to be like, oh, I'm only eating sardines. And it's logistically restrictive. And psychologically, there's a difference between this is working and this is sustainable. And for me, right now, I'm not coming from severe metabolic dysfunction. I'm in that annoying last stretch where I'm trying to lose the final 10 to 20 pounds. And I'm also dealing with some thyroid issues and some environmental toxin and infection stuff that I've uncovered through additional testing. So for me, a very long sardine fast may not be the most health supportive tool at this time. But for somebody else though, especially someone with a lot more fat to lose, insulin resistance, poor glucose control, or the need for a strong metabolic reset, something like this could be incredibly effective. So that's why I keep coming back to context. The same protocol can be amazing for one person and unnecessary for another. And one of the most valuable things I learned from this experiment actually came after I went back to my normal carnivore eating. Because for a long time, I'd kind of leaned toward the idea that if you've been carnivore for years, you may not necessarily run very high ketones because maybe your body is just more efficient at using them. And maybe for some people that's true, but for me, this experiment really challenged that. What I learned is that I personally do much better when my ketones are in roughly the 1 to 4 range. When I'm eating just regular carnivore with no attention paid to meal timing, total quantity of food, or how much energy I'm taking in, I can absolutely overeat. I can eat a lot, like a lot. And when I do that, my ketones are garbage, I'm not losing weight, and I can absolutely gain. So yes, for anyone out there that's still saying you can't gain weight on carnivore, you absolutely can. I've been doing this for almost 3.5 years now, and I've seen plenty of ups and downs. What this experiment reinforced for me is that ketone management matters for me. Meal timing matters for me. And using sardines strategically, even just a few cans, can help me shift back into a metabolic state where I feel and perform better. And that may actually be the biggest takeaway here. Not that everyone needs to go out and do a 21-day sardine fast, but that sardines are a very powerful tool. They are simple, they're nutrient dense, they are affordable, they're safe, they're effective, and in the right context, they can be used casually or strategically to create a very meaningful metabolic shift. So, was it worth it? Yes, absolutely. It was worth it because I learned a lot. It was worth it because the data was fascinating. And because now I understand my own responsibility responses to food simplicity, ketosis, meal timing, and appetite regulation so much better. But I also think the lesson for me is not do more and more and more. The lesson is to use the tool more strategically. Shorter sardine fasts, targeted sardine days, using sardines to raise ketones and simplify intake when I need that. Not necessarily living on them for a month. Now, if you want more of my sardine experiments, sardine recipes, and breakdowns of all this data, I want you to check out this sardine playlist. And I want to know from you, have you ever tried sardines? Have you done a sardine fast? And if you look at this data, what stands out to you the most? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed because I have a lot more N of 1 data, carnivore experiments, blood work breakdowns, and metabolic health content coming. I'll see you in the next video.